And welcome to the process. My name is Dr. John Bush, lesson 19 on deck. I hope you've seen the other lessons. I'm a university professor, microbiologist, so been teaching at university since 1995. So been doing a lot of data analysis through my master's and PhD, and love fantasy football. I've enjoyed taking folks' money and winning. So, what can I say about that? I usually put out a textbook every year. It's pretty much stays hidden in Kindle. I figure you if you dig for it and find it, then good for you. But I probably have not tooted my horn enough. I assure you that many in the industry would be tweeting every day about the latest and greatest. But this is a process for me to help folks that want to become better at stuff, approach fantasy football that they love. That's it, and maybe make some money along the way. So with that said, I have covered a lot on age analysis. I think I had 6 lectures. So this is kind of on the tail end of that. This is more functioning on looking at positions across years with the averages and variation, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And here, let's get going. And I've mentioned reference class forecasting before. It is important to know kind of on the average where things stand in metrics that you may employ to help you with your draft, which in my hands, for my drafts, about 60% of my success is tied to the draft. So it's well worth my time to get deep. And one of the reasons I do this is because when I go back over it, it helps me and I learn new things. So there is a selfish aspect. By teaching, you also make yourself better at the material. So this is a table here, kind of shows what we'll cover in this lesson. Year sectors, positions, end of season sector kind of subgroup there, average of fantasy points, and variation. So I broke it out, and the reason I picked some of these is just kind of equal parts. I had no bias going into breaking apart every 3 or 4 years or whatever. Okay. I'm curious as to the quarterback, running back, tight end, and wide receivers. And the sector that I know is key for most is the top 6. Okay, that's what's probably going to make or break. Now, this is end of season. That means that it's not ADP. Okay, this is the actual survivors, right? So we can talk about injuries and things, especially in something like running backs, and that's part of the zero running back concept here. A little bit more about late quarterback drafting as well. People sometimes wait on tight ends. Whatever the strategy is, it's important to see where things are at. And I like to see things, data across a landscape. And so this is kind of blocks of years sector, I call it. So here's the average fantasy points. So this is all quarterbacks, 2002 to 6. What is that? 4 years maybe. So 4 times. That's 24 quarterbacks, right? Top 6 every year, 4 years, right? So it's 24. Yeah. So the average was 22.2 for the grand average, right? All 24 fantasy points, and variation was 36. Think of that, 36 points. So there's a kind of above or below the average would catch most of the quarterbacks of the 24. Running backs, 259, almost 260, with a higher variation, about 48 points above or below. Tight ends, weak sauce at 183. In the old days, they didn't use tight ends as much. Even the top six, that's weak sauce, 38 points. And then wide receivers on average 300 points, plus or minus 30, 31. So in the golden days of the running back, they were the star. And you probably never considered zero running back as a play. So let's just kind of breeze through the next years, '07 to 11. The quarterbacks actually moved up a notch. The running backs regressed. Tight ends moved up. Wide receivers about the same. Wide receivers, by the way, have the lowest variation. So this concept I've talked about is that you have a group of wide receivers that tend to be clustered close together in the top six, and you'll see that's throughout. So the safest pick is going to be a wide receiver, but it may not be the most valuable pick in getting you points. Okay, so it's kind of like, do you buy bonds or do you buy the risky stocks, or what's your strategy there? And that's why we love fantasy football. Everybody can apply a different strategy. Quarterbacks and running backs are still have nice variations associated with them. Uh, Next, 12 to 16, quarterbacks continue moving up. So the trend of quarterbacks scoring more and being used and bringing home more of the bacon is even more critical, and it continues. And of course, your eyes will jump ahead to 17 to 20. Even more quarterbacks in the top six are producing more points. So as late QB drafting has been in vogue, just be aware that the trends are actually moving up as far as total, fantasy averages there. Uh, Wide receivers are pretty much universally going to be the lowest variance, so there's a lot more packed together. Uh, they actually start taking over in 12, right? They kind of tied in 7 to 11 with running backs. Now they're over the running backs in 12 to 16. And then the last 4 years, we see quarterbacks increasing, running backs kind of bouncing back, kind of the good old days. And so we may be seeing an uptrend. Uh, Tight ends really have kind of gone and really haven't done much, really. Okay, they're as good as they were in '07, so there's no upward trend that way in the top six at the end of the season. Uh, Tight ends though have the highest variance they've ever had. So that means there's a little bit of skewing probably in the top six, like the first one, two are going to be kind of distanced from maybe 3, 4, 5, or 6 or something. So I think the premium tight end, that high variation is kind of telling you something there a little bit, that a lot of people are starting to go earlier tight end, and I think they wouldn't necessarily know this metric, but I think having that higher variance is part of that strategy. Wide receivers have had the highest variance, but still the lowest of all the positions as well. But running backs, like I said, are back ahead of wide receivers in the top six. So, and then the highest variation is in running backs. So that means we do have some extreme running backs in the last 4 years in the top six. So there's even more of a skew to the higher 1, 2, 3. So I think the stakes are even a little bit more higher, assuming no injury, COVID, etc. On that. So that's setting the table here. So you need to consider what's actionable. To me, if you go later quarterback, just be aware that you may have to make up more than you've ever had to make up in the past sector blocks. Running backs are coming back some, and so a zero running back may not have the luster it did, and the highest variation is 1720. And notice we didn't see that kind of variation till back in the golden age of running backs. So we may be moving back up. So just be aware for 2021 and beyond. We're going to watch that trend. Tight ends, there's a high variation. And again, this skewing to the top one or two. And wide receivers have a little bit more skew to that, but not, great. So I think uh, zero running back is a little more risky, as in the last few years. Tight ends, first or second, are probably going to be well worth the draft capital. And then running backs, wide receivers are always going to be your safety there. And do consider, if you do late round quarterback, which I do, but I'm just saying you're going to have to make up some points there per game. Okay, so think about this. You want to look and consider the what this really means for us. Here's the visual way to look at the averages across the four sectors. And you see tight ends have increased, but not much since 07. Okay, we talked a little bit about variation. Running backs have dropped, and now they're kind of maybe coming back. Quarterbacks have completely moved up. They may be getting closer to a plateau. There may be at some point quarterbacks just can't score anymore, right? I don't know where that's at. Wide receivers have been fairly level compared. So you need to consider this. In other words, if I found a early quarterback that I thought was really, could be the top one or two, I might draft them earlier. But and I'm going to rethink my zero running back this year. Just think about it. Depends on your draft pick and where you end up. At some point, probably a wide receiver is a safe pick. So we'll see how that goes. For instance, the old turn of the river there, the 12th and 13th pick, it might be a tight end wide receiver, might be a play, the top tight end. I don't know yet. We'll have to see how the mock drafts come out and where people's, what the public's doing, right? You always have to match your strategy against the public. The ADP, it's thought to be worthy of concern is because it's telling you kind of the average thinking out there, right? And a lot of people only, if you're going to play in the high stakes league, then I would use the high stakes ADPs, right? Versus the Yahoo or the home league type areas, right? So I try to pick the pockets with the low hanging fruit. So I'm hanging out with the regular folks, and frankly, it's it's easier to pick the pockets there. Why am I going against, if I'm the 11th best player with players better than me, I do not want to be the sucker at the table. So I do not advocate high stakes. One of the reasons is game theory suggests if you have any advantage, you should play more plays, right? Bankroll wise, right? If you have no advantage, then you play one big play. So I guess if I was a losing player and I had $200 to spend or $300, and that was my season bankroll, I'd pick one high stakes league and just go for it. Okay. On the other hand, I would tend to take that bankroll and try to get 30 leagues, right? Because I have a great advantage, rate of return on the dollar. So, think a little bit about game theory here. So here's the variations. I wanted just to kind of let you look again and see some of the texts that I've seen, and that you have to pay attention to the metrics. You cannot ignore the metrics. Most likely, your judgment's, probably not better than the average, and you're biased. Okay. But now you know that, right? So I'm just telling you now, don't think you are, above average on everything. Most likely, just play like you're not. Play defensive, conservative, at the right times. Balance your approach, right? Don't go crazy. Okay. Here's the variations, and you see kind of the giraffes are the running backs. Only in 2007 did their variation drop. So there was a lot more of running backs in that era, kind of close together, whereas you see a lot more skewing. And even now, notice tight ends, quarterbacks, even there's a lot more variation now. So the stakes are probably even higher for drafting versus say 2002, where you just, hey, I'm taking two running backs. Hope I grab one of the top six. Okay, that was kind of the story. So anyway, take a look at that. I don't think that, just looking at the variation changes how I would approach it. But it's good to know where the variation is, because that's going to, the higher the variation, the higher the uncertainty. Okay. And making decisions under uncertainty is what people in certain disciplines study their lifetime. So, you're not, you're, unless you've been doing it and you have an expertise, you're, that's going to be a difficult thing. And in some of our early lessons, we talked about uncertainty and biases, and you need to review that, if nothing else. Okay. Again, this, if you're, I don't know why you would jump in here, but if you're first and you see the data, we go on a slog. This is not something, here's this, dude. There is no magic map plan. There's no magic bean. There's no magic 8 ball. Okay. If it was me, this looks like a lot of work trying to figure this stuff out, right? So, you know, I know that. So it is not the common denominator type of material. So don't expect it to be. And I would not be party to where I couldn't be at the level that I would be at, right? I would not treat people differently. I wouldn't try to, as some in the podcasting or whatever would say, dumb down. I have higher expectations for all of us, right? Just a little common sense, folks. Come on now. You can do this. We can crush this season. Okay, so what about the next sector here, the top 12 now? So the stakes higher? What's going on with things like averages and variation in top positions? Back in the golden days of the running back, uh, looks like the tops, the 7th through 12th running backs were below the quarterback in averages. Still the highest in variation. I think that high in variation is just telling you something about the position. And I think zero running back flourished, having lots more uncertainty about that. Wide receivers in this range are really, during the 02 to 6, really kind of all packed together there. Quarterbacks have increasing 7 to 12. And if you look back, keep going down on quarterbacks, the average there is pretty close to the average of the top six. So I think that to me, when I'm drafting, I'm looking in this range of a quarterback and then trying to make it up elsewhere. Okay. So I think people do grab too early. I could understand why. It's nice to have a position in your pocket, as it were. I got that. Okay. Uh, Wide receivers lose their luster after the top six, maybe even the top three, and wide receivers are the game. Okay, so if you're picking two running backs, one's going to be in the top six, one's in the top seven. Most likely, unless you get lucky and both of them are in the top six, you cost yourself. So I'm not sure I would do running back, running back. I do understand the zero and the injury, and people want to be safe. Got that. So I'm just for me personally, I would definitely do running back, wide receiver, or running back, tight end, or something. Uh, Tight ends are have higher, lowest variation, especially recently. Not producing as much. They've actually kind of dropped. So in the old days, you actually could do better drafting, '07 to 16 at the 7 through 12. Now we're getting this skew, and those tight ends are producing less. So be aware that if you do the late tight end, you're probably more TD dependent than ever. That's what the averages are showing to me, and there's a big grouping. Some people say it doesn't matter 7 through 12. I think the low variation is that's the data. That's the landscape there at that point. Wide receivers again are fairly safe play, average wise, but they they have declined from 12 to 16 a little bit, and on par with 7 to 11, and pretty much 02 to 6 as well. So have higher variation though, a little bit more skew in the running wide receivers. And let's see, I think I grabbed this. Yeah. So seems to me, as I look the landscape, quarterbacks are producing, but there's a bigger skew. So in the old days, maybe the production was kind of more uniform across the 7th through 12th. I think now there's towards the 11th, 12th. I think the data is saying that it's getting a little worse down there than it used to be in the in oh, this is the average. My bad. So quarterbacks have increased 7th to 12th as well, but not since probably, I guess, 11. So 12 to 20th, they've been about the same. Wide receivers fairly steady. Running backs fairly steady. Tight ends kind of have a loop, kind of they were low, high, high, and then kind of dropping down a little bit. Okay. Variation. I could go through the table, but I think the landscape graphs show you the show. And notice '02 to 6 versus 17 to 20th. Notice that quarterbacks now are that higher variation. And again, I was going to talk about the 10th, 11th, 12th quarterbacks are a little bit probably less productive than 12 to 16, you know, in previous. So running backs, the variation is since '07 is about the same. Wide receivers though, there's a skew coming, and so we may be seeing some shift across this sector to closer to the 7th than the 12th there. So you might be, things may be playing out for you if you wait and pick up the 11th or 12th wide receiver. I mean, don't you wish you could pick up, the top of everything, right? The ultimate draft. I have the top of everything. Hard to do that these days. Everybody's smarter because there's so much information now. It makes it harder for us to try to live it on the scraps. And if you're listening to this lesson, you actually get that advantage here. We're going to potentially be away from the crowd. Always best to move away from the average in the crowd, and just like in stock or any kind of investments, right? You know, pay low for high value, right? You know, pretty common. Just for us to look at some aspects here across this is the top six and the 7th through 12th. I show the top 1 to 6, and I circle the top in each kind of group there. So I don't know, is that the top? Well, whatever it is. Yeah. So we're looking across, and it just shows that wide receivers, I think, recently are doing better, deeper than they were back in '02 and '06. Okay, I think that's for sure. I think running backs after the 7th to 12th have not done as well, in recent times. Well, compared to the golden age of running backs, I guess they're better than the two segments before. Wide receivers still doing pretty good actually in the last 17 to 20. So I do like that. And this should just be circling some interesting points here. Not sure exactly if there's anything of strict patterns here. I just like to kind of lay out all the pieces and consider. Some people do a soft focus where you just kind of let your eyes wander around and look. So to me, that's some of why I made this figure, is just kind of wander around, see what's there, see what's of interest. And again, this is variation. So I'm just looking at the variation, and in the top six, it's running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers have the highest variation. And in the 7th to 12th, quarterbacks and running backs, wide receivers have the highest variation in the last 4 years. So high variation. Okay, so take a look, think about some of that a little bit. I don't know if I got this or not. Oh yeah, I graphed that. So I think if you look across the years, it is clear, almost all positions, that the top six in each group are going to have the highest variation. The risks are going to be higher. People think maybe later. No, it's early. So all the efforts you spend to make your first and second pick could be very critical. And I think that's what could win your league. I think everybody kind of knows that, but I'm not sure, where things are at. But just be aware of the positional variation and where that lands versus, say, here's the 48th, and you see pretty low variation. Okay, you can see some of the highs and lows here on variation. Just take a look at that. There's a lot more I want to say about that. This is really subtle, and we may be tie breaking at this point, but it's good to think about. So quarterbacks. So instead of actual numbers, I scaled the variation. And since I know 1 to 6 is the number one variation, then I made that 100% in quarterbacks. And then you could look at the variation drops in quarterbacks. And then you can see that the highest variation is, of course, here. But notice in the 7th to 12th, it's the highest it's ever been. 7 to 12. So there's, like I said, there may be some skewing from the bottom of that sector up. Okay, so just be aware of that. 13th through 18th, pretty much, uh, you know, it is what it is. And notice that we're getting potential plays, and this may be the rise of two quarterback leagues, but the variation is the lowest in the 19th through 24th. So your second or third quarterback, it may not be so critical there. I would be concerned if I was picking below the 25th. What I thought was the 25th and later, because that is strong variation there. So who knows what you're getting? You will be risky living those arenas there. And you can take a look at the graphs, and I think you see that the red is the pattern, the highest variation dropping, and then you do get some a little bit higher variation here, and then dropping again with the quarterbacks. So interesting, you get some of the lowest variation in this world right here. So that I think as a safe two quarterback pick, I think stay at above the 18th pick would be what I would be shooting for, grabbing an optimal QB1, but then kind of waiting until I got my second or maybe third one in this range. Running backs, here's variation again, looking, and for the most part, we had the lowest variation in 7th to 12th running backs, and pretty much the lowest uh, up to the 48th running back. So I think there's a skewing up, and then there's a kind of a collection of running backs that are pretty close together after the 13th running back. And certainly by after the 24th, you're even dropping more. So in other words, a lot of the running backs from 25th to 42nd are going to look a lot alike as far as probably seasonal production and worth on average. I understand you can pick, the hot dog out of here, right? I don't think those occur as much as you think they occur. I think it's a mind game that you play later in the draft. You kind of get a little loosey with your draft capital. Be aware of that. You picking because I'm gambling, or you picking because you have a strategy? What are you doing here? Is this handcuffing? Okay. I like handcuffs that are viable weekly anyway. Give you some touchdown upside, right? The third, the passing running back, second on the charge, something to give you a little oomph up if I'm going to draft later running backs versus just sitting on the bench, because that's going to drive you nuts when you could have maybe got something else. Be aware of that tendency you draft and then you chunk them away. I understand that happens. Here's the variation. The orange is the last year, and we have high variation. It drops, and it's kind of been some of the lowest in a while. Get a little bit of up variation here, but we're so low at this point, and you hit the bottom kind of on these running backs here, 19th to 24th. So probably those are going to look a lot alike, and you may get a little bit more variation through here. So just have a plan, kind of your first and then your later running backs here. That's what I do. Have a tight ends. Variation, boy, the variation is just dropped out here compared to 12 to 16. Look at that number, 7 to 12. So we are in the era now that I think a lot of tight ends are getting play, whereas in the old days, those tight ends were getting less play, and there was a skew towards the seventh. This data tells me they're a lot more uniform through the 12th. So that's why people do the late tight end, because they figure in this range they're getting about the same player per week. That probably has truth to it. Okay, so my strategy, probably based on this, is grabbing an early tight end or wait and can go even later still. Here's the data. We have some higher variation. If you're in a tight end premium or a two tight end league or something, you're going to get the highest variation after the 19th pick. Okay, it's bottoming out there and then going back up a little bit. So be aware of that. And just, if you draft three tight ends, I'm not sure I'm going below the 30th to grab my third tight end there. I understand the tight end premium league, bye week wonder, but a lot of people just do streaming at that point, and I'm not sure that's not a viable approach in a tight end heavy league. Wide receivers, variation is pretty much been the same on the 7th through 12th. A little bit of choppiness in the 18th through 13th to 18th, but that's pretty much the same variation all the way down, to the 36th. So in a lot of ways, you're getting the same collection and tightness of wide receivers as a group in those sectors. Okay, so probably maybe the public knows a lot more than we give them credit for here. And then you get even less variation after the 37th pick. So that wide end 4 or 5 or 6 is probably even less critical who you're grabbing, right? The lowest variation means you can grab anybody. So you still got some uncertainty at 7th through 12th wide receivers there. So that is some critical situation. And it wasn't always that way. Take a look at 12 to 16, 07 to 11. We're almost mimicking 02 to 6, except notice here. Okay, so back in the day, these sectors clustered together a lot more than what we see here. This means there's a skewing even towards the 7th pick away from the 12th in that sector. So I'm not sure that your 12th running back, wide receiver, is more valuable than the 13th. You may even get a better shot a little bit later. So in other words, if you're past a certain level of running wide receiver, I'm not sure I wouldn't be fishing elsewhere if you've reached that point. So you need to kind of get some landmarks in your head of kind of where those breaks are in the ADP. I'll have lessons on how I use ADP and whatnot, just to give you some look-see at that. Here's the variation. Notice it's pretty tight, okay? Here's the latest and some of the lowest variation here, but yet some of the highest, high variation. So just, be aware that the drop is a little skewed upward a little bit, so you're not getting a dramatic drop like the running backs. So think about it, what this means, and then kind of consider where we're at now. And then here's looking across all variations, 7th through 12th and so forth down here. Okay, so looking at all the different variations, we see that quarterbacks, for the most part, are pretty low. So I think you're getting the same guy 13th through 18th. That's the later quarterback concept here. Wide receivers, but we're getting a skewing here in this range, and even more of a skew here, looking across at the positional variation. Really skewful in the running backs and the tight ends. So I guess it's better to be at the top of a tier for the running backs and tight ends late. I guess tight end 3, running back 3. Okay, even more than wide receiver 3. Okay, so just be aware of that as well, that you're getting a lot of skewness here. Here is the quarterbacks. Wow, look at that. And that's, pretty much you're getting the high, 7th through 12th. You're getting 13th through 18th here. A lot more skewed to the 13th than the 18th. Here's the, the tight ends here. You're getting a lot more skewed to the tight end 3. Then you drop, and then you kind of get that. Here is a gradual rise in the variation. So you start, getting away from the, to the running back. You're getting a lot more skew with later running backs. So, if I thought I was at the end of a tier, I think I'd wait for the early part of the next tier. I would not be rushing out. I know people give you the tier, but I think that's not made with any kind of variation embedded into it. Okay, they're just kind of thinking, kind of averaging, and I'm not sure that's the best way to set up tiers. I think variation needs to be part of that structure. There's no formula yet that I've had time to work on. It's very possible that probably the daily fantasy sports syndicates, they probably have an art form to uncertainty and how to deal with, how they do their picks and whatnot. I bet you there's an art form, but I don't think we'll hear about it. I wouldn't. I'd put that time and effort with my group of investor friends, then I wouldn't share that with anybody. I wouldn't know anything. Huh? I don't know anything. So think about that variation and your tier structure. I urge you to come back to this when you're doing your tearing, not crying with tears, but making tears. So that's my 10-cent tour of the process. Again, my name is Dr. John Bush. I'm glad you listening to me. I hope this imparts a little bit of thoughtfulness, and that's the goal, is try to help you out. And again, I suspect if this data's exploded your head, then you're probably not making much of a journey with me, and that's fine. Have fun. Enjoy. Life's too short. I wouldn't waste a lot of time, though, if you're not going to really, live with the metrics. Hey, see your kids more, right? Take them out and have fun. Fly a kite. Do something fun. Okay? Because fantasy football shouldn't take the place of wasting fun family time. Okay? Balance your life. Okay. Come back. See ya.